I'm going to tell you about one of the great football, and it can't be underestimated, public flameouts of all time. I'm going to argue that this particular person, who, no doubt about it, had an epic pro football flameout, had an epic underlying public flameout, but I'm also going to tell you how much impact and influence he had. In fact, I'll go so far, and you're going to laugh at me at various points today, and that's okay, because I'm going to make a pretty compelling argument, I think. Because I think his name's going to come up pretty often over the next 3 weeks. But I'll tell you that his influence and impact is on a short list, and I can probably play around, and you can too, making a short list of the most important, that's the important word here, the most important football players in this state in the past 50 years. And it sounds pretty dramatic, and it sounds like a huge setup, and I think it is. And you're going to laugh, so you're going to laugh this person off. And I think you're going to be wrong about some of that. Now, some of it you need to laugh. But some of it is not appreciated, and I'm not even sure understood. I'll even argue that how underappreciated he was because he made everyone around him rich. He flamed out, and they got rich. I'm also going to use, I don't know how many times. If you would like to keep count, you can do so right now. But I feel it coming on, so I'm just going to tell you now. I'm also going to use a Porky's reference every now and then. I said it, Porky's. You don't know, then you just don't know. How's that for a setup? I'm sorry, Ward, did you just say you're going to use Porky's references? I am. Porky's part 1 through 5 to be exact. So good luck to you. It's the time of year, the reason why I do this, because it's the time of year when people not only talk about the NFL draft, but talk about the NFL draft in the nerdy ways that I like to talk about football in general. It's always nerdy. But you're also going to get a lot of this. And I think it's kind of interesting by itself, and maybe more interesting for more people than my nerdy conversation about the NFL draft. And that is the Great Flameouts. I mean, that is, they call them busts. I call them flameouts. And in particular, I'm going to use some time to focus on this person because I think it's one of the most bizarre and underappreciated stories of, the last couple of decades. The great Aggie flameout that made everyone rich along the way. Am I suggesting that some of you should feel guilty, that some people should feel a little guilty along the way? Absolutely, I'm suggesting that. I'm also going to mention Porky's. So I'm going to argue that one of the greatest flameouts on and off the field, and there's no denying either one of them, is also the most influential person in Texas A&M football history. And I know it's not the greatest history. I get it. Sorry to offend you. I think this guy's got one of the most impactful careers in football history. So you start laughing now. And you do with my Porky's references whatever you would like to do. I'm going to make a good case. So you just cheer along or criticize along or cuss me along the way. That's fine. And I'm going to throw that Porky's reference back in your face. The great flameouts of the NFL draft. I played against some. I played with some. The great flameouts of the NFL draft are, these are legendary, man. There's lists everywhere now. The list always starts with Jamarcus Russell at the top of every list. Almost the top of every list. Now, I'm going to work through this thing in different ways. He was the perfect example of what a lot of people in the football business call falling in love with the tape. It's easy to do when you study too much, you watch too much, you sort of it's window shopping. You talk yourself into what a great deal that product is. Well, a lot of times in the world of football, there's so much time and energy spent in scouting and watching someone, you almost you do talk yourself into it. And the term is falling in love with the tape. It was the Raiders who picked Jamarcus Russell. He was 6'6", 260, but the big problem was he turned 260 into about 340. It's kind of tough to be a good quarterback when you're really, really fat. It's not a good start, especially in your first year. So during the season, he got fat, Problem one. And he kept throwing the ball to the other teams. Problem number two. He was drafted in, I guess it was 2007. His first year. I mean, it's put on 60 pounds in the wrong way. And his first year, 2 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. His career stat line, besides getting really fat, 18 touchdowns, 23 interceptions, career over in 3 years. Just so you know, up until recently, rookie contracts were 3 years. I want you to keep that in mind as I work my way up to the star of the day. So he's done in 3 years, never to be heard from again. The list has, look, at various times, it has any combination of these guys. Jamarcus Russell, quarterback for the Raiders. It was an epic flameout. Ryan Leaf was the second player taken in the draft in the late 90s by the Chargers. He ended up playing for the Cowboys at one time. And this guy was an absolute off-the-field dumpster fire, to the point that he was in and out of jail. While he was coaching at one point, I don't know if he was selling drugs. You just got to read the story by yourself. But I say this because he is a fascinating person now. The guy has completely owned his past. If I could ever get him on the show, he's one of those interesting, thoughtful guests. Oh, his life was a mess. Absolute mess. But the dude owns it. And he really has good advice. Like, he's been through it. So Ryan Leaf was considered a can't miss. He was taken after Peyton Manning in that draft, and he was awful. Tony Mandrich was taken by the Green Bay Packers. He's considered one of the greatest busts of all time. There was a Sports Illustrated story about Tony Mandrich. Now remember, this is when I was playing, and everybody is roided out. And I mean roided out. What's that mean, Jeff? Anabolic steroids, goof. That's what that means. A lot of them. Puffy, big, strong, and the minute you get drug tested is shockingly the minute these guys change, because they're not on the roids. Tony Mandrich was called the greatest offensive lineman of all time by Sports Illustrated, and he lasted 3 years. He was number 3 on the list. Charles Rogers was a wide receiver for the Lions. The Lions had a long history of screwing things up. Number 5 on the list, and this is a guy I got to get on the show, and I know him, is Brian Bosworth. And it's not entirely true. It is and it isn't. He'll be on every draft bust list you can think of. But I know him, and I know how he played. Okay? It's not entirely accurate. Brian Bosworth is one of the best college players I've ever played against or seen. And I remember the ESPN documentary about him a couple of years ago. I was on there, and I more than once said his personality. I mean, I can't imagine what he would be like in a social media world. He does Dr. Pepper commercials now, just so you know. He's the cop in the really funny Dr. Pepper commercials. Fantastic college player. Better than people realized. And honestly, wasn't a bad player, but flamed out in a couple of years because he got hurt. And he was drafted by the Seahawks. I think he was the 11th pick or something like that. And yes, he's considered an NFL flameout because he only played a couple of years. But he also sued the NFL and won over an injury. So his story of his career is, I guess on one end it's a bust, but not necessarily his fault. Interesting dude, though. All right. All that out of the way. You're going to see any combination of these guys on NFL draft busts, blah, blah, blah. Now, Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football. Yeah, here it comes. Johnny Manziel won the Heisman Trophy in 2012, and he won it easily. Oh, yeah, Johnny Manziel is going to be on every flameout list you can think of. He is every bad fraternity joke you can come up with. I'm saying Porky's today. He's all of it. It all went horribly wrong. But I don't think people understand how everyone got rich. So he won the Heisman Trophy in 2012. He won it easily and deserved it. He won the Davey O'Brien Award, and he deserved that. That's the quarterback of the year. He was the Associated Press Player of the Year. He was SEC Player of the Year. He was All-American, blah, 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 blah. He owned every award in that time period. All of it was deserved. Again, it's easy to get lost in the fog of, wow, what a human mess you are, versus the time that somebody was a good player. Beyond a good player, great player. I'm going to argue even further than that. He was one of the most dynamic players of the past 25 years. Put a ball in his hands. I know people are going to freak out comparing anyone to Vince Young, but it was that kind of dynamic player that was, I call it some quarterbacks sandlot players. Vince Young's the greatest sandlot quarterback I've ever seen. In other words, you don't even know what the play is, but just watch that dude go make something happen. Johnny Manziel was similar. Yeah. I'm sorry, Texas fans. Yeah. At that time, in that style, in that way, he was similar. So he wins every award. I think he's the only player, think about this, the only player in SEC history to have back-to-back 500-yard games. He turned into Johnny Football when A&M beat Alabama. Alabama was number 1 in the country at the time, and this game is the stuff of legends for making everybody rich, making him rich, his coach rich, his offensive coordinator rich, and adding seats to a stadium. All of that happened when they beat Alabama 29-24-ish, Aggies, something like that. Think about this. I looked up that game. He had 345 of their 418 yards by himself. He was that good. Got it? He was also a Porky's movie. Yeah. Porky's. There's the third Porky's reference. You still don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Yeah, well, you haven't lived till you see the great comedy. The Schindler's List of comedies, that Porky's series, right? So his career went as expected, I would say, in the quarterback dark hole that is Cleveland. He's taken by the Browns, and guess what happens whenever you're picked by the Browns? Everything goes wrong. It doesn't work. It's like it's like a Bermuda Triangle of quarterbacks. Everybody who ends up there ends up being garbage, and everyone blames them for it. Has anyone ever decided, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, that organization really sucks, and they can't get anything right? I'm not saying Johnny Manziel deserved anything good. He didn't. It was epic. But just notice that long list of players that end up in Cleveland, and look what happens to them. How's that? The Bermuda Triangle of quarterbacks. There's another one for you. So let me tell you what he did. Okay, and then we'll talk. Then we can make all the jokes about him that we want. He ends up in the dark hole that is Cleveland. He's the first pick in the draft. Blah 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 blah. So here is his career. Cleveland Browns, 2000, I told you, rookie contracts are 3 years at the time. They're now at 4, and then you get a possibly an option year. Okay? Cleveland Browns, 2014 to 2015. Oops. Yeah. It was 1 year. Yeesh. You got to be really, really bad to get a run out of the NFL in 1 year. Okay? Especially when you're the first round pick. You have to be really, really bad and really, really a mess to get run out of the NFL in 1 year. When you're a first-round pick. There are guys like me that weren't first-round picks that would get run from town to town every other week. But when you're the first pick of a franchise and they run you out in a year and a half, you are a wreck. And he was a wreck. His career went like this. The Cleveland Browns, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, the Montreal Alouettes, the Memphis Express, and then you're going to have to help me. I thought I knew a lot, but I don't know this. It says Johnny Manziel currently plays for the FCF Zappers. What? What is that? What is that? Is that like a Frisbee league in Zilker Park? What is that? Help me. I guess he's getting paid. I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But let me say this about when he makes these lists and everyone makes their jokes and laughs at him and makes fun of him. Let me tell you kind of the byproduct of what this guy did and how, I don't know, how you ought to appreciate a little bit more. Okay, so I think he was the most influential player in Texas A&M history. Granted, my history doesn't go back to the old days. But I do think he is. Just as the Texas list is going to be longer than A&M, but you had these players. And I'm not saying you call them the best players. I'm talking about the most important and impactful. The most important and impactful. I don't know anyone else that went through A&M that had as much of an impact as he did. He made his coach rich. He made his offensive coordinator a future head college coach and a future NFL coach, and he got rich. And you know what? Both of them are terrible. They're terrible. He made them rich. I don't, some Aggie would argue with me about how much, and I know it's awkward to say this, but coming off the college career that he had, the dynamic college career that he had, and he deserved everything. In terms of these dynamic quarterbacks, and I say dynamic, not as if I'm talking about Tom Brady or Joe Burrow. I'm not talking about the great pure passers of the game. I'm talking about these dynamic sandlot quarterbacks, Vince Young, Tim Tebow, Johnny Manziel, Michael Vick. No, I didn't mention Patrick Mahomes. Those kind of players, right? You can't help but watch the game when the ball is in their hands. He was that guy. And I don't think people like to acknowledge it. He built a section. There was an entire section added on to Kyle Field. I know people would say, well, they had plans to do that anyway. I don't know that I buy that. He made them more popular. He made the program more lucrative. He, I think, had a big say and impact on adding to a giant stadium. Kevin Sumlin was his college coach. You know what? He's not very good. He's not good at what he does. In 2013, I think it was, fresh off a Johnny Manziel 11-2 season. Remember what those were like? 11-2 season. Kevin Sumlin gets a fully guaranteed contract of 6 years for $30 million. He was fired in 2017 and got $10 million. He got that money, to be honest, largely because of Johnny Manziel. Cliff Kingsbury, ever heard of him? Yeah. Okay, he was the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M when Johnny Manziel was there. He rode the Johnny Manziel success train to become the head coach at Texas Tech. You know how bad of a coach he is? He got rich. He looked good because of Johnny Manziel. He was so bad. He was such a bad college coach. He had Patrick Mahomes on his team. You know what? Brandon and Isaac could win more games with Patrick Mahomes. Okay? A squirrel can win some games if Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback, correct? He is Patrick Mahomes. He still got fired. He ends up as somehow. Now, I do know how because they're terrible. The Arizona Cardinals franchise is the Cleveland Browns of the desert. That's what they are. But Cliff Kingsbury, riding the Johnny Manziel wave, gets hired at Texas Tech. He's got Patrick Mahomes. He screws that up. Can't make that work. He then somehow gets hired by the Arizona Cardinals. What a shock. Even with the first pick in the draft, that was Kyler Murray. His pick, he got a 6-year contract with the idiotic Arizona Cardinals. He went 4-13 and got fired. He finished his NFL career 28-37-1. So why are you telling us this, Jeff? Because Johnny Manziel made all those guys rich, and he made them all look like they could coach, and they can't. They're terrible at what they do. And he made them. He made them. On top of making a lot of coaches rich, Kyle Field was expanded just after his time at A&M. So, the takeaways. Are you ready for the takeaways? I look at the great NFL draft flameouts, and he is one of them. He was an absolute train wreck for the Cleveland Browns. He only lasted a year and a half. His drunk TikTok videos lasted longer than his career with the Cleveland Browns. I know, I get it. He was an epic flameout in every way. But lost in that is what this guy did in his career and how many people he made wealthy and got them jobs. I mean, every day, Cliff Kingsbury, as he sits in some cool condo with his girlfriend or wife or whoever that is that's constantly doing TikTok videos herself, everyone should be sending him a thank you note every day. Thank you for getting me rich, Johnny. I'm really not any good at coaching, but thank you for making me rich. That's what they should do. He was the biggest draft and pro football flameout in Texas history. That I will argue for certain. I'm not sure who else is even close. You could say Vince Young, but Vince Young bounced around. Well, this guy, he's playing for the FCF Zappers now, everyone. So he's in a category by himself in that bad way. But yeah, at the same time, I think he was the most influential player ever at Texas A&M. And he made all those people around him wealthy. And he made that stadium much bigger than it is. And yes, one last time. Are you ready for it? I did say he was a Porky's movie.